G'day, freedom lovers. Mark here, aka Batty. That's what me mates call me, and I like to think we're all mates here. So maybe I should just go to Batty. I don't know. Well, I'm talking to people, and people are saying that the whole Aussie larrikin thing's the way to go. That's our culture, that's our people. But hey, you tell me what you think in the description. Drop in a comment down there, and you tell me, should I be going as Mark or as Batty? Let me know. But before we get started with our amazing guest Dylan Wilson here from Land Law Marshal, I would like to start with good old fail of the week. And we've got a new contender, Mr. Aaron Harper here, but here's a little something I pre-prepared for this special occasion. Enjoy. Fail of the week. Welcome to Fail of the Week, and this week we've got Aaron Harper as an epic fail. Sometimes I think maybe I'm not going to be able to keep doing this week after week, but some people just seem to make it easy for me. Let's have a look at why he's a fail.
Oh yeah, okay, get it all out now. Get your abuse out now. Righto. When you actually want to hear from me, I'll start. So, do you actually want to hear what we're doing or not? Well, I'll wait until you're finished and then I'll speak. Are you done? Do you want me to speak or not? Or I can just walk away. I'll get it off your chest. So, are we going to listen or not?
So as you can see at this week's crime rally, he wasn't exactly well received, but the icing on the cake was when he said this.
Have a little bit of respect. Well, you called me here, so I'm either going to bloody speak or I'm not. Yes, no? I bet you if I walked around, half of you are bloody LNP anyway. I'll rent a crowd.
As you can see, it's not exactly the nicest way to treat people who are victims of crime and are definitely concerned and are asking to be heard. You seem to have failed on that element because you just keep asking people, will you listen to me? I think we're done listening to you. Maybe you need to listen to the people. Here's some people you didn't listen to that emphasise the point.
I and my daughter were a victim of crime. My daughter's car was stolen back in 2013, so that's 10 years ago. In all these years, nothing's changed. Nobody's listened. But I'm trying to get appointments to see these pollies. They refuse to see you. They don't want to hear what you're saying.
Tell us about what you've been seeing on your security cameras.
Since the juvenile residential homes have infected Annandale, as multiple ones of them, crime has gone through the roof. These kids dance in front of our cameras on the street. They line up 4 stolen cars in a row because they know we've got cameras.
Have you taken any of this up with Les Walker?
Les Walker cooks a great sausage. We went home and still don't feel safe in our homes.
So a couple of sausages is not going to buy some happiness in this case?
It's not going to stop our elderly from being home invaded and assaulted in their own homes.
We've had people killed on the roads. We've got a young bloke who's had a compound fracture because they used a vehicle to knock him off his bike.
It was everything that I thought and knew in my heart, being in that hospital bed when everybody connected to me, and how quickly and rapidly people came to me with all the information, support, as well as the Townsville Bulletin, rapidly changing the story to get that perspective of it was intent. They were malicious. They striked me. They waited for the opportunity to target and hit me, and they have no regard or remorse whatsoever. To have that crowd there stand made me believe the very thing that I'm talking about is the Australian spirit, the community. The very community that I stand here to go, this is something that we should all be in support of, our freedoms.
I bet you if I walked around, half of you are bloody LNP anyway. I'll rent a crowd.
Well, that concludes this week's Fail of the Week. Stay tuned for next week's winner. Well, there you have it, folks. That's good old Aaron Harper, and I think he definitely earned Fail of the Week this week. But let's see who pops up next week, and hey, maybe this is a point for the crowd to sort of start maybe throwing some suggestions. If you see someone doing an epic fail like that, please let us know. All you have to do is send me an email. Here's my email address. You just pop in there and you say hello and let me know what's going on. And of course, we've got all our other social media links there. If you're enjoying what I'm doing and the content I'm putting out there, there's some links there for you to help me financially, because this does take a lot of time, a lot of effort. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dylan Didge Wilson. How are you, mate?
G'day. Thanks, Batty, mate. I'm good, mate. I'm not too bad at the minute. All things considered, with what we've confronting here. It's I'm doing all right. How are you going?
Oh, well, as good as anybody who's awake and aware of what's going on, we're just getting through it. But I think I'm feeling pretty positive in the sense that, I'm starting to connect with people like yourself and so many others, something's just changed in the last, I don't know, month or so, possibly, well, it's been changing for quite some time. Obviously, the last 3 to 4 years have been a big awakening, but I don't know, I'm feeling something, more recently that's really sort of opening things up. But I don't know, how are you feeling about the world?
Well, mate, it's definitely coming around full circle. It's time to confront all the truth, and it's come to that point where we're seeing a ramp up by the system to take control of things and look at the situation around us. The price of fuel, the price of food, the price of living in every way. Like, to buy a home is near impossible. To think about starting a life and buying a home, it's a lifetime of debt just to please these rich buggers that run the show. And it's proper tyranny coming at us from every angle, and there's real reasons for everything we confront. Oh, that was quite a good little intro, that video there, and it just goes to show, proves the point that there's simply no obligation to find accountability within the systems that exist on this continent, pretending to be government and law, and as a result, the people are just getting hammered at every possible route. So look, it's a big discussion. We'll touch on that tonight. There's reason for that. There's genuine reason for that, and there's genuine solution to moving away from that as well, and alternatives that come down to us, the people, working together and creating those. So great big yarn to have, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a bit of a yarn and share the story. It's good
my
to be
pleasure,
here, buddy.
mate. That's what we do here, mate. Do our best to, help people get their voices out. It's not just a voice for this person or that person. It's a voice for everybody, particularly those who can't get their voice out elsewhere. So I think a good place to start would be sort of, what I like to ask people, sort of, where's that point where you go, hang on, something's not right here. I've really got to start, looking into things and figuring out the world as it is, and not perhaps the, illusion that we've, so many have been accustomed to, and those are people like us that have kind of, woken up from. So where was your start point, mate?
Well, mate, I've had a couple of different starting points, to be honest. I had some local stuff in the Bunyalung, where we had a CSG mine come in. There was a massive protest in a place called Bentley, where we all, as a community, we had a 10,000 people support at one point, and big police presence trying to bully their way in on behalf of a CSG company. And I got involved locally on a level there, meeting some elders and things like that from a different perspective. But then off to the side of that, I got involved in the more, nationwide sort of situation with the anti-Islam movement a long time ago. Is when I first stepped in as a patriot. See, I was a flag-waving patriot. I used to stand quite abruptly and publicly against the behaviours inside Islam. But I've always had a thing about racism. I have no time for racism. Where I come from and the people I've grown up with, we don't see any of that stuff. We've got black and white families, there's black fella, white fella with no drama in our world that way. So there was a level of white supremacy and white nationalism that was inside that patriot movement that I ended up standing against as well. And my so I went from that sort of movement of energy to sort of want to defend my family. I have children. The day I became a father, pretty much it all started for me, like trying to find ways to defend my family for their future, so they don't have to pick up the baton and take on this fight in the future. So that's the most important drive I have. The motive for everything I do is so they don't have to do it. And look, I had to learn, I had to go through the process of learning. I went through different stages of my own development in this discussion, from, being a flag waving patriot. I ended up on a walkabout. I walked 1,000 k's across New South Wales. I was heading to see my daughter in Perth from the east here, and took a protest walk on quite seriously. And I got an opportunity to meet a whole manner of different people and collect their will. And I had, big ideas to try and, create energy towards change. And I ended up in Canberra, walking in with Clinton Pryor in 2017. I got to the fire there and met a huge group of elders, and And at that stage, I laid down the Union Jack, and I'd never picked it up again because the truth about the original nations and the crimes ongoing against them became quite apparent to me that's the lack of obligation that we exist with in our system comes down to the fact that our whole Australia is not a real nation. So it's an assumption to law and government on blackfella country. And as a result, we don't have accountability at any level throughout police, government and judicial systems, except against the people. So the people can be held accountable, but those that run the systems, they just won't because the obligation's not there. So I went through that whole process learning to come to a point of I wanted to help more and have created a couple of concepts that have the impact possible to create massive change if we can get people to support them. Like the People's Treaty idea was an idea where the non-original people on the continent, make an agreement among themselves and to ourselves and each other that will acknowledge and uphold the original nation's rights and acknowledge those nations exclusively as the jurisdiction through a treaty process that removes the government's position in it all and take all the power off.
Hold you up a sec there, man. So how long do you think it took for you to sort of reach those conclusions? Like from that point where you've gone sort of, for your big long walk and you end up in Canberra, how long has this journey been going for?
Well, mate, it's nearly a decade now. It's been pretty full on, but I've known the full truth about things for about 5 years, and I've been pretty intense publicly trying to get people to confront this, like through the People's Treaty concept and now through the Office of the Land Law Marshal.
All right. Well, let's start there with that People's Treaty. That People's Treaty concept there, man. So tell me a little bit about the People's Treaty and how that sort of come to be.
Well, the idea was to create new civil laws and have an agreement in place that allowed the original jurisdiction to give right to those laws, a way that honoured and protected those original nations and their right to jurisdiction eternally, but also a way for us to live in a civil society which is in the benefit of all humanity. So we ran polls on a website for basic orders to order the system to follow the will of the people to start cleaning up that mess. And we had things polling like, we won't tolerate child abuse and pedophilia and satanic abuse of children and that type of behaviour. And it was in 99.9% of people out of 1,800 people or so that used that poll. We had 99% in agreement, and that was one of 160 different polls that were on there. And probably a good 30 or 40% of them were high 90s. So we'd found all these different policy and ideas for law, for civil law and order that we agreed on. So the basic standards of democracy, but in play at a high level of agreement rather than a 51-49 argument. It was all 95, 96, 97, 98, 99%. It was just a way to collect the will of the people essentially and have an agreement in place that we would honour the original nation's jurisdiction and come to some sort of formal agreement that was an alternative to the government making any decisions. So essentially just a way forward, alternative to the system that was lawful and incapable of being stopped by anything at law. So that was.
And is that currently up on your website at the moment?
Sorry, mate?
Is that People's Treaty up on the website at the moment?
No, well, see, I've been in quite a heavy stand against the system for a while, so I haven't been and had any income for several years at some time. So that website was running on a donation from my fellow Jim Greer. And some stuff happened in 2021 there in Canberra around Jim, and I hadn't paid the bill on that website, and it just disappeared. I got no idea what happened to it. It just disappeared. So okay. I've had to focus my energy elsewhere, and the stuff that happened with Jim, I wasn't impressed with all the energy in Canberra that came with all that. He brought a gun into the triangle there and caused a bit of grief. So
right.
There's a lot of things there that once trust is gone with me, I don't mess around. I'm honest and transparent about everything, about everybody who comes across my path that doesn't, do the right thing with the information when they're given it. And it's a pretty hard line to have to hold, but I have to hold it because it's been asked of me in the knowledge I have and the fact that I have children that deserve a lawful future. And I won't tolerate anything other than a lawful outcome. So
So which tribes have you been working with?
I work with nations, not tribes. The
Oh,
original
yes,
nations,
true.
there's many nations, there's many tribes within nations, and I couldn't exactly put it down to any particular tribes, but certain people from different areas, mostly in the Bunyalung, where I've started. I work closely with a senior lawman in Walluble country, who, if it's anything really serious, really big and high level energy, I'll go to him first for direction. But I just generally keep close contact with him regularly, sitting at the fire and talking about the things that I intend to do and that are in support of the truth here. So I don't make claims or assume authority over anybody or anything of the sort. I just tell the truth, and I'm trying to hold the systems accountable for genocide for 235 years that it's been ongoing as a means to creating a result which can bankrupt these trillionaires that run the New World Order, because they're all complicit in that genocide. And that's a direct route to a solution against this globalist agenda. So we can get the power in the people's hands and the financial systems of the planet running from genuine national sovereignty of the sovereign nations of this planet, and take away the banks. So there's a lot of good news in all that, because the fact are, with Australia being unlawful, the jurisdiction of all contracts ever written here has no binding obligation. So there's no lawful contract in existence. So there's no debt. Nobody owns anything in reality. It all is still an open, unlawful occupation, everything here. So all the debts and all the mortgages, all the fines and everything, no one has to pay any of that. It's just something we continue to do, which perpetuates the problem and holds it there in place.
So in short, you're kind of saying that the current standing system is just one big illusion, and all we need to do is kind of turn around and say...
It's 100% an absolute fiction. There's not a single ounce of law within anything that has Commonwealth, Crown, or the title Australia on this continent. None of it has nothing at law. It's completely irrelevant at law. Every court here is a kangaroo court, and every police force is a pretend force of thugs with guns that are enforcing policy on behalf of this foreign crown with no idea about jurisdiction. I've never met a copper who can even get past the word without getting in a huff. They don't comprehend what they're doing, or if they do, then they know they're at the highest level of criminality on the planet. That's some pretty serious crime that they're committing against these original nations, still ongoing, and trying to usurp their authority and their law and their jurisdiction. And this is what we just witnessed with the voice. I'll ask you a simple question, and everyone should ask themselves. Why on earth would a nation that's allegedly real, like Australia, allegedly a real nation, why on earth would it need an agreement of any kind with its original inhabitants of the land 123 years after the fact? It's an absolute lawful impossibility. It's proof in itself that the Constitution was founded with no legitimacy and no right to be here. So that comes down to consenting agreements, treaties, declarations of war and conquest by the English Empire, the British Empire, but there was no such thing, and that was due to the use of terra nullius, right? I'm sorry this is a history lesson, but I like to get it all out so it's clear and people can go back and read over it and listen closely. But
that perhaps let's start at a sort of a beginning point and try to push it through in a chronological structure so that the average person can sort of wrap their head around it. It's one of those things I find, with a lot of people who have, got so much information to say, and it can be a bit tricky because I know we're kind of dealing with a web. It's not always a straight linear construct. But, if we go right back to the, that original point, Captain Cook lobs up, First Fleet, hi, we're here, I've got this wonderful flag and all these prisoners I want to dump here. What's the legal standing of the British empire, so to speak, to even do that?
Well, this is where it all comes down to the common law that people talk about here, and the common law is part of the Commonwealth, and the common law is the case law precedent for the Commonwealth. So the case law precedent and the precedent globally at the time for exploration and coming into contact with other peoples on other lands before forming Commonwealth systems was treaty or a forced conquest and surrender. So those laws were in place, and when they came here, at first they were doing it like they were going for it where blackfellas had some sort of recognition, but once they brought in terra nullius and claimed the whole land as terra nullius, so void of any inhabitants or civilized humanity, by doing that they overrode all their own laws in that moment and made it impossible for the original people to have any lawful rights.
How would you describe that structure? Would you say that's kind of like a legal fiction, a fraud? Like, I mean, they're trying to say
it's an
there's
absolute
nothing here.
fraud. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime of the most absurd. Like, it's as bad as it gets. The use of terra nullius meant there was no accountability for any of the crimes that they committed against the people here. So there was the rape, pillage, and destruction and outright genocide and murder of First Nations people here, of the original mobs through all that time prior to like 1967, when they were finally being put into the public discussion and recognised under these constitutional rules and things like that. When that all began, until that sort of era, there was some pretty heinous crimes going on at the behest of the system, and government-sanctioned genocide and massacres were happening right up well after the 1900s and the federation of this so-called country. So the foundations of what Australia is as a government and nation is a horrid crime of genocides. But that's not to say that the people, Australian people, are genocidal maniacs. Like, we are just good people who are the results of this. Mm-hmm. But what it means is that the systems we're allowing to continue in this so-called nationhood is actually still a crime against all these real nations. And as a result, we have no accountability or obligations for any accountability to exist within the frameworks of their Crown and Commonwealth jurisdiction assumptions. So we're not a real Commonwealth nation. Like, the laws don't apply here like they do everywhere else. It's it's proven fact repeatedly. It's just a hard one to prove because the only courts here are kangaroos, so they don't have any obligation to find any outcome.
So that statement in itself, like, it's a proven fact, but it's hard to prove. Like, I mean, if I was like somebody looking to dismantle your argument, that'd be the opening place to start. So,
well, that's all right. You can try. Like, anybody who wants to dismantle my position, I encourage to go right ahead and try and find some contrary evidence, because everything I've put on display is part of what I'm doing at the moment, which is outright open treason and treachery against the Commonwealth. That's the Commonwealth of Australia, the Commonwealth of the UK and Britain, the Crown. You know, I have no problem committing these crimes, being seditious against this system openly in everything I do. Everything I do is an attempt to, destroy this government system and take it down. And so if I was incorrect about any of this, I'd be facing some pretty serious 25 to life type situation. And I don't have any fear of that, mate. It's not a reality because the system doesn't have any contrary evidence. I put it to the test with the help of others. We've put it to the test to every level of assumed authority. The High Court can't explain itself. Parliamentary members can't explain themselves. The Prime Minister's office can't explain itself. The Governor General's office, the National Indigenous Australian Agency, they can't explain themselves. There's just none of them that have a contrary bit of evidence to everything being put forward by our office in our direction to hold them accountable for genocide and complicity in genocide, which is the big one. Because the complicity in genocide of every nation on earth is the reason Australia gets away with its position in the UN, and the whole agenda for the New World Order to take it over is reliant on Australia getting into a position of legitimacy as a nation so they can come and usurp it under the constructs they've already built. So that's their plan, and by holding on to Australia, we the people are actually helping them along with their plan unknowingly. And all we have to do is tell the truth and figure out new ways and alternative systems on the continent, taking over the infrastructure that was gifted by the Commonwealth when it was here committing crimes. So
when this terra nullius thing comes in, what year was that? Do you know?
1835.
So 1835. So we were looking what, maybe about 50 years of, kind of a kind of colonization, for lack of a better term, before they've just gone, stuff it. Let's just make this shit up and run with that. So
yeah, kind of. It's like the original terra nullius claim was made by Cook over lands between Cook Island and somewhere in the south and everything to the east of that. But that's basically covers Norfolk Island and those islands that are now the registered address of the business Australia, the corporate Australia, because that's terra nullius, that place. Like that was land claimed with no people on it. So it's the only lawful claim that the British made throughout that whole process was over there in Norfolk Island. So that's their real prison colony. All the other colonies were unlawfully put here and built here on the pretense eventually that they could try and use the legal fiction terra nullius to get away with it. But they were outright committing genocide from the day they got here. They were sending blankets out in the very early stages of the colony's expansion off the coast. They were, smallpox in blankets. There was a deliberate pushback to push blackfellas away from the coastal areas, and that's part of what genocide is. It's not just killing people when you're forcibly removing children from one place to another, when you're deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life designed to bring about their destruction in whole or in part. It's still genocide. So there's a whole manner of different parts of genocide that people, when they hear the word, they get very, we're not killing anybody. It's not about that. It's about the fact that the laws and the jurisdiction of those original nations is not being lawfully protected the way it has the right on the land before anything else can stand above it. So every single action against these original nations or attempt to contract with them is a deliberate act designed to bring about the destruction of those nations' right to jurisdiction. So that's an act of genocide, and that's what we're all complicit in by allowing Australia to continue as a nation when it's not really a nation. And in my opinion, I don't know why anybody would want to uphold a fake nation when, in the bigger picture, what that means is we aren't recognisable under international law. So we don't have human rights. We don't have any rights at all. We don't have a defence system. The defence belongs to the British Crown. The line of authority goes to the King. So the entire army and military acts on behalf of the King, not in defence of Australia. Australia is just a corporate arm of the Commonwealth that doesn't have a lawful nationhood. We don't have a military body defending our land. We have it defending their infrastructure. And it's on behalf of them. And that's one of the biggest issues we have is in this belief, this patriotism to Australia. When you really give it the time and thought, it's hard to find anything good about Australia outside of the people. Like the people of Daroon. I love being an Aussie. I love the larrikin, the spirit, I was a ringer in the outback for many years. I love that life, Australiana is in my heart.
Yep.
But, and I love that our lifestyle, but I can't pretend to be something that's not real when I learned that it was a crime. And in terms of taking on the system, I stand quite free and happy and content in being able to hold this position based on just the truth. I don't have to, embellish on it. I don't have to, create an agenda with it. I just tell the truth. This is blackfella country and you can't prove any different. And that's the bottom line. So the law, I don't give the law any assumption of jurisdiction by doing that. And I'm replacing their assumption with something real, not just tying them up in their own legalese. So I can go through the court process without a piece of paper, without an ID, and barefoot and come out the other side in a few hours, with a smile on my face and tucker in my belly. So I'm really not too phased to have to do this again. I've been under scrutiny from the public many times over. A lot of people tell a lot of lies about me. I've got people that think I'm a secret agent. I've got people that Sheila thinks I'm Jesus, and carries on like that.
Well, before we get into that, let's maybe come back a bit in this, an attempted chronological sort of a structure. So, they've declared this terra nullius thing, what was it, 1835, and then we move along under this pretense, whatnot, that, apparently there's nothing there, but obviously you're thinking the people who are, buying this have got to be able to look around and go, well, actually there is. And, from my time up and down the coast talking to people, you hear of some horrific crimes committed against, the native peoples and, the nations and whatnot, to the extent that there's, I've seen many murals, to acknowledge, a massacre was here, a massacre was there, and, there is a really horrible history there that I think a lot of people have got to come to terms with, and I think it's a hard one to sort of swallow, especially because like you said, most Aussies we're the larrikin, we're having, everyone's me mate, come on, come have a beer, mate, let's, we're generally peace loving, happy sort of people, and I think it is a really shocking reality to have to deal with the fact that our idea of our Australiana larrikin culture, as much as we all love it, is built on such a horrible history. But I mean, again, there's a whole TV show called Horrible Histories. If you want to feel better about the what's happened here in Australia, you can go and have a look at all the other horrible histories. It's like a global epidemic of horrific shit, and it hasn't stopped. We can still see now we've got these warmongers going nuts again and inflaming everybody's religious beliefs and personal beliefs, and it's just madness. We are in a realm of utter lunacy in my view. But yeah, trying to face that truth, I think that was definitely a big one for me too, just having to accept that this shit happened. But as we move along,
it's a tough one for people to swallow, eh?
Yeah, and that it's the same with a lot of things. That you believed that this was true, whatever that fictional construct was. And then all of a sudden you see Toto pulling the curtain back. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to that man. But if you want to wake up from the dream, you've got to pay attention to the man behind the curtain, realize a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, and we need to come to a lot of factual understandings. But we move in through time here and we hit the Constitution, the original construct of that Constitution, and again, it's given royal assent. The British say it's okay, and again, that's backed by this terra nullius, correct?
Yeah, well, that was the assumption, that with the use of terra nullius and having that option in play, like, it meant that the Pacific Islander Protection Act, the Patents of the King in 1836, they weren't relevant to anything here on the continent because they weren't seeing any people here. So it meant they can get away with creating the situation and claiming their law on behalf of God, which is quite insulting to anyone who's a part of the church. Like, I'm not a churchy person, I'm not a religious person, but anybody who was might feel that that's quite disrespectful if they comprehended how that was actually done and achieved. And it all comes down to the Constitution, the first word, whereas, in the preamble, which actually means in contrast to or contrary to the fact that. So when you apply that with the first sentence in that preamble, it's in contrast to or contrary to the fact that we the people rely humbly on the blessings of Almighty God, we went ahead and constituted Federated Australia. So in that statement there, in the very first sentence of your Constitution, it tells you that it's against God's law what they're doing. So they were in contrast to God's blessings when they federated Australia, because they didn't follow the common precedent of having treaty or surrender or conquest and mapped an actual conquest of this continent. So that's the difference between everywhere else in the world and here. The use of terra nullius, the implication that nobody was here, meant they didn't have to follow the procedures and the protocols of how they'd formally created governance and law in the expansion of their empires. So that's how it comes down to what we have being a fiction, because it was all implied, and the assumption that their jurisdiction was legitimised through the Constitution was written in such ways that nobody would question them. And so if you go on through the timeline, you'll note that we went straight to war, and then we come back, we went depression and war again, and then we've come through that into war and then more political driven world after, the massive industrial revolution that went on here as well. So that people have been tied up in government-led policy and globalist policy this whole time. We've had war and industrial revolution coming straight through the periods of time in the birth of this so-called nation. We're only 123 years old according to this constitution. Everything that was here before that wasn't Australian. It was New South Wales, it was Irish, it was Welsh, Scottish, English. They were still using everything else. They were running under this federal Council of Australasia, and so there was a whole nother assumption to the jurisdiction on behalf of the royal societies and the crown. So there was all being prepared to create Australia, but they were never going to go for consenting agreements there and then. They were going to go for all-out genocide under the concept of terra nullius, under the use of that lie. So this is coming up again now, because you'll notice it within the freedom movement, everybody's reaching out to Aboriginal people and trying to get them on board with their concepts, knowing full well that their jurisdiction is supreme. And because that's how law works, and they have a first-in-time vested law right, and that's globally recognisable, if the people here and their tacit consent will defend that rather than defend the fictional claims that are Australia. So that's where the big issue comes in, is that our loyalty and our patriotism holds us on to a fiction because we don't want to confront the truth in the past and the history of this so-called nation. And it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to acknowledge that if something's deeply wrong in the foundations of what we call law and government, law protects our freedoms, and it also has the power to take our freedom from us. So if that law is not real and it's acting as an assumption, then that's not good enough. End of story. It doesn't matter how they come to be, and it doesn't matter how prejudiced you might feel about anything, or your loyalties and your patriotism and the Anzac spirit and all the things that might connect you to that idea that Australia is worth the fight. The fact is, you are giving a fictional system with no obligations to itself power over your freedom and your liberty and your family, and that's just not good enough. And I've got kids, and I'm not going to tolerate that, and I'll be holding the system accountable for genocide. And I encourage everybody to learn about how to stand free against it, defend themselves with the truth, until this system has no choice but to just confront it. And we'll be in the process of creating alternatives with the right elders and the right agreement making, but it won't be with the government's help, and it won't be on behalf of the Crown. It'll be as free people who do the right thing and are ready to be part of real nations and move forward together. Because the crime this big can't be left unaccounted, because that precedence means you'll never hold anyone accountable for genocide on this planet. So I don't care what your thoughts are in Israel and Palestine. I don't care what your thoughts are in any other conflict that's going on in the world, but any genocide that's going on, whether it's Fauci and Bill Gates and the WHO and bloody Klaus Schwab and all these bastards that are getting away with it through this jibby-jab experiment or this bloody, just this globalist agenda to usurp all these nations' rights to law and create an all-powerful sovereign. This is genocidal behaviour, and the precedent right now is that you can get away with it, and that's because of what we're allowing in the idea and concept that Australia is real, and that's a huge thing to confront. But there's no shame, there's no blame, and there's no reason to fear unity if we can tell the truth and put our best foot forward and create alternatives. And I feel that's a reality for everybody to get involved in. It's not something that I want to direct. It's not something that I'm even attempting. I'm working from a place of accountability. And I encourage others to work from a place of unification and creation for alternative directions. Local, national governments, things like that. Bring it home, become localised, know your nation, work with it, work with the mobs, take on these big incidents instead of asking the government to take care of it. Take it on instead of the government. Don't give them the access to the funding. Don't fund them. Don't pay your fines. Don't pay your mortgages. Tell them you know where you are, and we'll create ways that get it all right. So that's where I'm at, mate. That's where I'm at, and a lot of people in this freedom movement know me from years of combativeness in the comment sections and the different Zoom meetings and things I've been a part of, and they all know that it was always going to come back to the black pillar sovereignty discussion, and I've been telling them for 5 years that that's been gonna happen, and here we are again, and it's time to confront it before they run through another voice or a treaty or some nonsense, and we let the government get their seat in something that could easily be the people's discussion.
That's it.
Anyway,
I'm inclined to agree with you. My time with the tribes up on country or nations up on country was, very enlightening in that regard to see that they're all saying and thinking the same thing, really. So, well, let's continue on your journey though. Like, what point do you start challenging the system? Where's your first sort of this isn't right? I'm going to stand my ground.
oh, there's a fair way back, I suppose. I don't know exactly. I started to notice that it was more about politics than it was people when I was in the patriot movement, and I stood against behaviours, and I was there's certain behaviours and certain ideologies that I don't agree with, particularly around the protections of children, and women as well. The treatment of women and the protections of children, and they're important behavioural issues that I want to be standing against always. And so I moved it from that to more based on the government policy and how come immigration was creating such an issue when it was all government led and government fed, and I went through that whole process to very quickly learn that this whole government was just nonsense, and I approached it with the idea that I could start a lawful rebellion and before my walkabout. And I just told them to get stuffed. I'm not paying anything. And I said, if you won't let me drive or fly or get across the border on a bus or without an ID, stuff you, I'll walk. And I started walking, and just further I went, the more vocal I got on, the little selfie stick thing going and chatting away to people who were following me on my walkabout, and then ended up going across the continent back in a vehicle with a bloke that's now a good friend of mine, and we went everywhere and just met people, and the more people we met, the more obvious it was becoming that there was some serious stuff going on against the original nations still in all parts of this continent. And when we got into Canberra, I just felt that it was time to take it on from that perspective, and I started taking on the system. I wanted to know if my intuition was correct, that
So how long is
they
this
were still
walk?
operating.
You started a long time ago and you've gone for a walk. So let's sort of map out your walk. Where did you start? Where did you go before you ended up in Canberra, and how long did that take?
Oh, I started in Lismore, in the Bunyalung, Widjabul Nation, and I ended up in Nyngan. 900 k's on my first walk section. I walked at night, pretty much the whole way at night, and
Wow.
down to New England and across town by town, and I couldn't just constantly do it. That's a lot of hard yakka walking that far. It was, I'd walk for a couple of days, have a break, go again, have a break, go again, and I was out for I can't remember, a couple of months at first, and then I had an opportunity to get back and see my grandfather for his 90th birthday before he passed, and so I did that. And then this fella came along, like I was saying, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sick of watching you walk. I want to take you to see your daughter, so let's take your protest mobile." And we did that, and I did another 100 k's walking over in WA up the west coast there in the south, and just met as many people as I could, and just asked them their will. I basically walked up to strangers and said, if your will could help change this system, what would your will be? And just see what people was on their mind, the things that really mattered to them, so I could focus on that.
What kind of answers did you get?
A lot of different things, like through the central west out here where the farming districts and the wheat belt and all that, just the problem with super farms was a massive issue, that all the localised farming, nobody could maintain a farm, a local small farm, and keep contracts with these big companies like Woolworths and that against these super farms who were just conglomerate monopolising all the different farming throughout the region, and the 457 visa workers were coming and taking all the work, and the towns were falling to pieces, and people are getting on the gear and stuff, and it's drugs are rife in these communities, and yeah, it's really torn the outback apart. There's a lot of talk about things like that through there. Mostly a lot of people talking about, the duality in the government, how it always feels like it's just both sides of the same coin, and it's just a fight to see who's more popular on the day. And, nobody trusts government. That was very apparent. Probably 90% of people I spoke to were quite clearly in distrust of the government. And, they all sort of wished me well and said, don't think you can change anything, mate, but good luck to you. And that sort of energy kept flowing wherever I went. And, I had a few little disagreements here and there, a few rough moments. Nearly died a couple of times, but, that'll happen, wandering around in the night.
So how did you nearly die? Would you come across a, nasty snake or...
No, I didn't come across any snakes. It was actually, I was sleeping in a hammock off these hardwood fence, and it snapped at the ground. The fence post did, and it fell down. There's about 200 kilos of wood come crashing down on the top of my head in the middle of my sleep.
Oh, Struth, that's a nice way to wake up.
Busted up the bridge of my nose. Yeah, there was another fella on another hammock just over from me, and it fell on his knee and crashed his knee. And so that was pretty wild. And I blew out my Achilles heel on day 2. And I had to walk 500 k's with a busted Achilles, so that was pretty yuck.
Wow.
And nearly got hit by a truck on a bridge when I had a support crew worker who was a bloody moron, and nearly got me killed on a bridge with a couple of trucks. And yeah, other than that, me and the Blue Dog, we went for a good old walkabout.
Rightio. So have you got like a lot of footage of this kind of adventure that people can go have a look at and see on your journeys?
I've got lots of it still, but all those pages and that are years old, and they've all come down.
Right.
Unfortunately, we have a movement that jumps from one thing to another a lot, but doesn't stay on path with solid direction. They're always willing to jump straight back into whoever's going to run the next, civil case or what do they call it? Those class action lawsuits and things. The next person wants to try and claim that they can charge someone in the government with treason. I'd love to get that clear, just by the way. Nobody will charge anybody with treason, ever, because you can't. The treason is a crime against a sovereign, all right? So there's no sovereign to commit treason against. So treason doesn't exist. I'm telling you right now, because I commit it openly. And it's not a crime. There's only one crime on this continent, and that's genocide. And because it's never been held to account, everything else is still ongoing as a crime, as part of that same crime. So until we hold that to account and close that door, we're never going to have a lawful future, and our children are destined to end up in this new world order. And as a father, I've got a baby on the way, and we've got a big future ahead, and we want the best for our family and for everyone else's families, and we want to see the best in what Australia has to offer, working with these original nations, so we can have the most lawful outcome and a real genuine chance at a lawful future where we can dream and create and do all those things. Everything that we're meant to be here for. Freedom, it's what everyone talks about, and freedom is freedom. Is that, there you go, John Blunston just come in and said Tapper. John, I used to work with John for Tapper. We created Tapper back in, that's a long time ago, John. He and I were the first two that sat down and discussed how to create Tapper, and so that was 12 policies designed to bring in the independent political runners and the small parties, all based on Australian values, and it was 12 policies to unite people. Well, lots changed since then, John, as you know, mate.
He used to cap off those 12 policies for us.
Oh, I couldn't rattle them off, but they were all basically, pro-agriculture, pro-Australian made, pro-Australian. They were proper, good nationalist, Australian nationalist policies. Nationalism's not a bad thing. It's only when you apply a racial line to your nationalism. Like white nationalism is not a healthy thing at all.
No.
But the nationalism of each nation on this continent is actually a solution for humanity. So
Yeah.
nationalism is something to be proud of, as long as it's the right nation you're defending.
There always seems to be some, tyrant that can take a good idea and make it as bad as evil as humanly possible, eh?
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
I find the same when people start seeing, occult symbols or whatnot, It's just, well, it's not so much the symbol that's bad, it's how they're using it that's bad, And you start looking at sacred geometries and things like that. These things have power, that's why they use them. But, it's not necessarily a bad thing, It's just what they've done to these things that make it look bad. So,
Well, that's going on everywhere, isn't it? But
yeah.
I don't use symbology or anything like that. I just tell it how it is on the day.
Mm.
Instead of trying to being on repeat, cut and paste everything, I just go again, and it'll come out a little bit differently articulated than the last time. But basically the same thing. The symbology of all of the system, like voting is the tacit consent necessary to win for them. Like we keep voting in systems until there's no lawful opposition to this whole thing, and they've got everything they need. It doesn't matter who we vote for; they've already decided what it's going to be. This referendum, I think it was just too big for them to bullshit somehow. They thought they had it. They thought they had it the way they were going to plan it.
I think that was the vibe I was getting. Like, I even made a comment publicly. I think it was about a day or two out that I'm like, just from reading, so much commentary and watching the desperation in their final push, to me it was like, I don't think even Joe Biden can get on top of this one.
Yeah, I know. They didn't have the little machines that they use in the US. They should have brought them over when they finished the US election. And brought them over for the
well, I'm glad they didn't.
The referendum. I'm glad they didn't too, though.
Yeah.
We probably still can't find them. They're stuck on a fence somewhere between Mexico and the US somewhere. In Texas.
I think too many people are onto it as well, That's the thing, nobody's got, faith in a lot of these systems anymore, And the last thing they need to do is, throw even further doubt onto it. But, yeah, I think we definitely dodged a huge bullet on that one, that's for sure. And, it was good to see the Australian people, for whatever reason they voted. I'm hoping it was because they smelt the rat, and it's been rotting in the corner for such a long time,
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons, definitely. There's, it's kind of like, it wouldn't have mattered if it had been a yes. We still could have always said no, because you don't have a lawful constitution that can hold a lawful referendum that can actually make a decision on behalf of these blackfellas. That's impossible, because it's a fiction. Fiction doesn't have that power, but we keep giving it that power. It's an unfortunate ignorance that we have here, but that's the whole reason I continue to do what I do. I try and break through that ignorance with education. I'm pretty stern at times. Some people don't like the way I deliver things, but I can't mollycoddle people's feelings and expect to help create solutions. So I just tell it how it is, so people can confront it. If you run away, then that makes you a coward. That's just basically how the world works. Cowards run, men stand, and tell the truth. The truth will win. The truth will set you free. It's all been said a million times to you, so I don't know why people keep denying it.
Good old 832.
Yeah. Well, this is it, and the big thing is, though, like where I'm at now, working with the Office of the Land Law Marshal, is I'm instigating a direction to hold accountability for genocide, to find accountable the Australian government, its departments, and all affiliated agents, as well as the UK Crown and the Holy See, and also the ICC, the United Nations, and all global governments that have contracted with the United Nations since allowing Australia to be signatory and pretend to be a nation in international contract. So what that means is these nations have been complicit, and all their contracts are null and void, and in very serious danger of causing massive global diplomatic relation fails. So what they're going to do is they're going to shape up and get all the laws nice and squared up, and they're going to honour the facts on this continent and maintain the integrity in the law. And so they will be helping fund and facilitate and a direction for an international court here on this continent. So that's the direction I'm putting at the ICC. I'm not asking them, I'm telling them. And I'll make simple, like a clean analogy for you. It's like the 10 Commandments. If you're only using 9 of them, then the 10 of them are irrelevant. So if you don't use all 10, then they're not law. So it's like, this is how it works in international law. They're ignoring the genocide laws. So all their other international law is under seriously vulnerable position in diplomatic relations globally, if that's the case. So I'm pushing that, because that's probably the only direction that will ever hold them to account. And because there's so many nations and so many big corporations who will contract to Australia and contract to the UN, who's complicit with Australia's existence, then it should be, with 235 years of calculated at the value of today's dollar for the reparations of the stolen nations, the genocide ongoing, and the stolen wealth off this land, the reparations should quite easily equate to enough to bankrupt the Vanguard and BlackRocks and all your globalist billionaires and trillionaires, and use international law to do it. So the military codes of the law protocols, the international military protocols, can step in and hold their own governments accountable, and those corporate bodies accountable, rather than that being mutiny as it stands at the moment. So it's a big yarn, but it's something that needs to be confronted. And people can't get it around their head. That's okay. They've got to take your time with it. There's a lot of information coming out of me right now. It's probably a lot to hear at once, and it's hard to get context on it all. It's, for me, I've said it 1,000 times, so it's becomes all too easy for me to lose myself.
Definitely a lot you're throwing at us. I've got a pretty good grasp of what you're saying and where you're going, because we've been on the journey for a while myself. But for those who are sort of perhaps baffled by a great deal of what's transpired here, where's a good place for them to sort of start looking to comprehend? I mean, obviously we've hit the terra nullius thing, and that kind of leads to the fact that fundamentally everything else is invalid. But where else can people look to go, hang on, this is not right? Where is my truth?
Well, it depends how you want to look at it. Like, I look at it from a position of international. So you've got a planet full of nations. There's rules and laws that apply between nations and as an international community that protect nations from one another to a certain degree, without declarations of war and things like that create massive unrest and things like that. So when you look at the world that way, you'll notice what's been happening with the New World Order is that they've been usurping all the nations around the globe and trapping their nations into debt within the centralised banking systems. And when you get to Australia, you'll notice that we already have the centralised banking system in place ahead of our government's law body being usurped, because it's not law. That's why they pushed the treaty, the yes vote and everything now, was to get the original people signed into the Constitution to legitimise the Constitution's claim to the land. Therefore, the centralised banks have access to Australia because they've taken the land. So they've already built their Australia the way they want it, and we're just maintaining that until they can finalise the agreement making with the blackfellas. So that's why you've got every state trying to do a treaty, and you've got every, they've been doing it for years, trying to get treaty. They've got ministers for treaty. They've got treaty bodies all over the place, and and even if you read up on the Australian government, its own treaty policy, its treaty making policies for its own government body are just so vague, and it's obvious they give themselves this authority to do things that they have no lawful right to be a part of treaty at all, with no sovereignty attached to their claim. So if you go down that road,
just to help people out a little bit too, I just for the viewer, if you're not quite sure on exactly what Dylan said, I definitely recommend you go and have a look at our Voice to Parliament video that I did with some of the tribal people, because they're saying a lot of exactly the same thing, and it might look like a couple of white fellas here just having a yarn, but we've spent a bit of time with black fellas too, and they're saying the same thing. So by all means, go and check out that video, because it's being said there. So yeah, sorry to cut you off there, mate. Go ahead.
No, that's all right, bro. It's fine. I'm just saying to look at it as a world of nations, you'll notice very quickly that the original nations here weren't given the appropriate rights through the acts of things like terra nullius. But terra nullius is a big one because that wasn't used anywhere else in the world to steal multiple nations at once. That was never done anywhere else. Everywhere else was acknowledged and conquered. Like the American Constitution was actually modeled off the Iroquois Confederacy Constitution with the Sioux Confederates help. So they had like treaties in place to allow the American Constitution to be written as it was. And if you notice, it's written "We the People," which doesn't leave any room for doubt or to make an opposing contrary position. "We the People" is a clear statement and puts the onus on the people. But when you write "whereas the people," you're actually whereas something else. You're in contrast to whatever comes next. So the entire Constitution here was built on that fakery. But
It's a good point. I never really.
For people to learn this type of thing, how to get to this position is to confront how the rules of the planet work and how come they're not applying with Australia. Why are we not in a position to have obligations to a sovereign and accountability within our systems? Why are government officials getting away with treason? Why are they getting away with helping their mates get big corporate jobs and big corporate contracts for whatever it might be, infrastructure projects? Why are they constantly flooding us with lies in our media and everything's been privately owned now instead of being nationalised? Why was everything that was nationalised when the Crown was here before 1973 turned into a corporation and unnationalised? Why did that happen? Because there was no sovereign. And this is how the world works. So when the Crown left, so-called Australia nation had no sovereign power making a claim. But the crime stopped in 73 on the Crown's part. And they walked away and remained complicit and left behind what we have now as the Australian government. And we the people keep perpetuating that. And if we could confront what that really means as a fundamental flaw in our society here, then we could find ways to work with the blackfellas and move forward through that and create something better as an alternative. But it's all about how nations work on the planet and international rights, obligations, and rules. Like, this is not a game. Like, we've got a massive criminal empire operating, pretending to be a nation, and the citizenry upholding that, thinking it's their nationhood and their birthright. And that's a really cruel joke on all of you. It's a really cruel joke on all of us, that we're the ones who end up committing the crime unknowingly. And what's even more cruel is if we hold on to that with a prejudice that denies the truth. And like I said earlier, I'm ready for anyone with contrary evidence, not just claims. I don't want to hear about pygmies and Egyptians being here and stuff before blackfellas. I don't want to hear any of that claiming nonsense, because what we have is real situations, 235 years of evidence of crimes against these nations and zero evidence in the contrary. So it's a big yarn. It's a big yarn, but it's time to have it. And I don't want to have to do so much on my own in terms of taking on the accountability road. And I'm trying to encourage people to support the petition that we've got out there, which is just a petition to count numbers. So when I speak to people like the ICC or global military bodies in their law bodies, then I'm talking with the support of people who want to see a similar outcome. People who
what's this petition?
The petition is basically just to say that you support the truth on this continent, and you won't be complicit in genocide, and you won't tolerate genocide.
And that's on the website?
And law. Beg your pardon?
And that's on your website, Land Law
That's
Marshal.
on the website, landlawmarshal.org. There's a ton of information on that website. It's been put together really well with, a dozen tabs or so on there. That the full pages are plenty of information on how to comprehend this. And we have Facebook groups as well, transparency page and a Facebook page, Land Law Marshal. And that's not a title I gave myself. That's a title that was created by a senior lawman of the Wallumbilla Nation, who told me that if I want to take on this system the way I am, I should do it with a title, so they remember who I am each time I do it. and it can be written that way so they know that I'm very serious, and he fully supports the creation of the office and the position I've put forward. He proofread the ICC letter that is on the website. You can download everything I'm doing is public. So I'm doing everything transparently with you, the people, so I'm fully auditable, and everything that I do can be audited and used as evidence in these international genocide proceedings when they come about, because it's the Nuremberg 2.0 everyone was screaming for, and if we start the process with holding them accountable with this 235-year ongoing genocide, then all genocide since starts to become accountable as well, and the reparations they owe are way beyond anything that they can maintain power in that situation. So the people become the power on the earth, and we recreate international diplomacy from that position.
Yeah. So a lot of people are going to be obviously thinking, wow, you trying to take on the world. You know, it's a big task, but
I'm not trying to take on the world. I have to take on every single one of them, because that's how the world works, and that's how the laws were written. So complicity in genocide is an international crime written into the same article as genocide itself. Now, I can't determine whether that was a deliberate act or not to write complicity in so that they themselves were complicit and therefore couldn't hold anybody else complicit or accountable, because they were an unlawful body in that instance. So the ICC, for instance, the International Criminal Court, how can it try a case for genocide when it's complicit in other genocides? It gives it a way out before it even starts. So it's like a catch-22 they created to keep themselves from being held to account.
Yeah.
And
there is a strange set of systems at play here. You know, a lot of the time I find myself observing things, it just doesn't add up. But it seems like there's almost like a secret code of conduct that's been, you know, handed down from somewhere that they're somehow bound by. Like, for instance, they have to tell you things 3 times and things like that, you know. Where is this world rule book? Like, I mean, obviously we have, you know, the United Nations and these international laws and all that sort of stuff. But again, if the people who are making the laws are the ones who are breaking them, how does one get justice?
This is the hard part in that. That's why I talk about the integrity of law and demanding integrity in the law. Because there's multiple contracts that exist between nations that become international law through the fact that there's more than one nation involved. So international law is a very broad spectrum of laws and agreements between nations. That itself is what protects us all, with the other laws being in play. They can't ignore one law and suggest that their other law has any, you know, stability or integrity. So when the pressure's applied correctly, then we bring in forth that fact which makes these other contracts vulnerable, which is what holds the world together, those other contracts. So there might be, you know, $1 trillion deals between 2 Arab nations that next door to that has been trying to get in on for years and can't, because their contracts are solid. The moment that we can challenge international law integrity, then all of their contracts start to become vulnerable. So every situation on earth in international law becomes vulnerable. So we're trying to apply pressure in such a way that they acknowledge the fact that their laws have to be upheld, otherwise it's not law. And if it's not law in one place, it's not law in another. So
very well answered.
The international world falls apart, essentially.
Yeah.
And look, there's one way or another that has to happen. This way we have an outcome which is in favour of humanity. The other way is in favour of globalist, you know, dictatorship and slavery. And, you know, in a depopulation event that leaves us all in the Hunger Games situation, you know. So what we have is a gifted infrastructure and system that we can take over as the people and work with the original nations to make it lawful in the multiple nations the way it needs to be. And we can go forward from there, but we can't pretend to be something we're not, and play a game of nations when we're not part of that community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the reason we're having this conversation today is because, you know, the black fellas I've been working with, and again referring to that, you know, Voice to Parliament video, they put me onto you. and said, "You got to talk to this dude." He's looking for a platform. Let's get it going. So here I am doing that, and I think it's important for the viewer to realize that. It's like the only reason we're having this conversation is because the black fellas pointed me to you. Which is pretty powerful because they're obviously saying the same kind of things. And to me, I think what's really important is that we do need to build the system that's going to replace this current fraud. Because obviously we're going to descend into utter chaos if we just go, cool, let's just tear this old horrible system down. Or, okay, so now what do we go by? Now what works? So how far along that process are you with your website, for example?
What my plan is to hold them accountable. So the moment this process starts and the public support is in favour of finding accountability, then we're going to be restructuring systems all over the world. We're not going to have a choice, right? Because the financial system won't be able to maintain itself when the bank's money is worthless because they're guilty of these crimes.
They've already made it worthless.
Well, this is the whole thing. It is worthless. It's only our attachment to it that's holding it in place. But each nation has its right to create its own sovereign economy. So if they were working together and we were all, I would suggest annexing the system. Right? Now, annexing is usually a term that's suggested to be illegal. It's usually done by an occupying force. So the systems here sort of annexed the blackfellas' lawful jurisdiction and built the colony, right? So what we need to do, reversing, in my opinion, so if we annex the system, right, so we don't allow the Commonwealth and Australia's assumptions of jurisdiction, and we start to make agreements with these original nations to restructure law and jurisdiction on how we, the people, feel law and jurisdiction shall be allowed in our world, as long as it honours those original nations' jurisdiction and right to law in that process, then we can just take this system as it stands because it doesn't have a lawful leg to stand on. And we would have lawful legs to stand on in terms of international diplomacy. So we can talk to other nations around the world on defending us in making that stand against those with the guns, who aren't going to want to be the enemies of the people the moment we have a lawful leg to stand on. It's the fact that we don't have a lawful leg when we fly our Union Jacks that they bully us. So we show up, say, like in Melbourne at the Shrine of Remembrance, and with all these red flags, and demand and tell them that we're Australia, we are. That is their authority to then treat you like whatever, because you don't have human rights the moment you claim Australian nationhood in front of them. You'll get common law people spending time in mental health, and you'll get all these constitutional experts that get locked up with broken arms and things like that, right? Now, I didn't do any of that stuff. When I was in Canberra, I got arrested 3 times in a week, and they couldn't hold me. Each time they tried to make a whole bunch of stories up as crimes for the last time.
That was a topic we wanted to get onto. So before you go down that path, let's go. You've walked into the door of Canberra, or walked into the realm currently known as Canberra. What happened? What was your motivation? Where do we go? So, because we kind of jumped to the end of this tale. Let's start at the beginning.
Well, that's kind of a different tale. That's the first time I went to Canberra in 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about the second time to Canberra. That was the more well-known version with the big million people that showed up after we were there. And so I was there with
so let's do the context thing. What when you first went to Canberra, because you drew attention to that. Let's talk about that, and then we'll go to your second.
Well, I first went to Canberra at the end of my walk. I went in with Clinton Pryor, who walked the whole way across the continent at the same time from the other direction. So he was walking into Canberra, and I wanted to walk in. He was walking for his people, and he got a seat with all these. He got a sitting with all these members of Parliament, and so that was a big event there, and got to speak with a heap of elders there on site. And I basically decided there and then I'm going to take responsibility for the crimes of the Commonwealth on the continent, and make every effort I can to bring about change based on that. Like, I won't be complicit in genocide, and I made that very clear. And I said I'll be making the effort to work in defence of these nations and until we find an outcome. And that was 2017, and I haven't stopped. Been doing the same thing on repeat. Conceptualising new ideas, trying to get the people to educate themselves, bringing the energy forward, just being transparent, doing it all in front of you all. So there's nothing to hide. It is what it is. It's the truth. It's like I can't change the truth to suit an agenda. I can just change myself to suit the truth and keep working towards a solution. So I ended up in Canberra more recently in 2020. At the end of 2020, I was working with a few mob who we'd sat around in private, and we'd spoken on several occasions about the idea of taking old Parliament House and take it as a building where the original nations could come in and sit and formally run their international diplomacy as nations, because that's where the infrastructure was built to its original head on behalf of the Crown. And they extended it onto the new Parliament House. So there's a lot of people questioning why were we at old Parliament back when that was happening. And that's because that's why. That's where the systems, infrastructure, and the whole line of authority was built to come to a point, was at that building, not at the new Parliament. So that was an extension to do with the corporation. That's got nothing to do with the Crown's claim to Australian Federation. So we were at the MOAD, the museum there, trying to get through the doors for a heap of days. We broke in, me and Uncle Bourmagen. We ended up inside the building and had a bit of a back and forth with the cops in there, and then there was big excitement. There was a huge fire. There was a little fire first, and then there was a second bigger fire, and there was a huge commotion, and there was a lot of energy going back and forth between us and the police there, and there was a few extra groups of people showing up that weren't involved with me personally, but were sort of in the same energy, ready to take on the same task with us. And so we didn't really know who was who in the zoo, and we just kept going for it. And the fires happened. And look, I tried to take responsibility for them fires. I told the police on the day, on repeat, on record, in recorded interview with them. I've said it, must have said it 1,000 times in front of a camera now since as well. I was happy to take responsibility, still am happy to take responsibility for that fire. As part of the insurgent behaviour, I was.
Now, some people might be confused. Like, why? Why would you? Like, I mean, you didn't really do it. Why would you want to take on that?
I know I didn't light the fire, no, but my actions were definitely insurgent. I was taking the building. That was my intention. I was taking it to take over the government. It was the same as running a coup in any other form. It's just not militarised. So it was an insurgent action against the Commonwealth, and there was a resulting fire. So the responsibility should have been mine. And that way it protects those who might have been involved, and I didn't know who lit it. So now that I do, I'm probably still would have wanted to protect them anyway. So the point is, it's not a crime for me defending these original nations to burn down the doors of an occupying building, and I can prove it. So that's why I never got in any trouble for it, and they won't let me take responsibility because I can prove that it's not a crime to burn down an occupying building. And it's not a crime to defend real nations and their right to national sovereignty ahead of a fictional system. It's not a crime.
It seems like a pretty dangerous concept because, it's almost as if, people could just go around doing whatever the hell they want, and, It
depends. You have to do it within the bounds of what's the law. Like, I'm defending the real nation's right to national sovereignty for a lawful future. I don't break their law. I don't harm anybody, and my actions are designed to bring the truth into light. I'm doing what I can. I put my head on the chopping block quite firmly, so other people will learn. And I'm taking it on for your children because no one else is. And this is how it has to be done. Unfortunately, I've tried to educate people calmly and quietly in the background. I've talked about this every single step of my journey. I've shared publicly so people can learn it with me, and they keep looking at me like it's up to me to do it, and then tell me that you can't do it all by yourself. It's a constant catch-22 getting thrown my way, and then people want to attack me because I'm doing it this way. It's like, well, I've been trying to give the information across freely for many, many years, so other people will involve themselves energetically, and we can create solutions together, or I can step aside. If people don't like me, I don't care. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to protect my children's right and future, so they don't have to pick this up. You know, because I'm a 40-year-old man. I've still got a little while left in me yet. But my son, he's not even 10, and I don't want him to turn 18 thinking he has to stand his ground against the government. I want us to have fixed it by then. I want us to have a world where we don't have to hate the system because the system's not criminal and against its people. You know, I want to see a system that's lawful and has the right people governing every nation here. And that's not black and white. That's everybody. That's all people, equitably. It doesn't matter what color you are. Right? This is the nation you're on. If you went to China, you'd still be a white fella in China. And you would be in China and you would follow China's laws because you're in China. And we should be given the same respect to these nations here instead of pretending that terra nullius was okay. Because it's not. It's the most heinous lie ever told. And the results are the biggest tyranny and prison colony on earth still operating, and we allow it willingly and stand with its flags in the air and scream patriotism. And that's a really terrifying reality for those of us with kids that don't want our children to step into that.
Yeah.
Do you know preschoolers? Do you know preschoolers know more about blackfella culture than most adults? Because the government is teaching them more about it than you know, so they don't have any questions when the government said that they've already taken care of it.
Yeah.
You see, their agenda is to usurp all of this while we argue over things that are irrelevant. While we fight over whose constitutional common law angle is going to do the least work. Because in the end, that's all it is, the least work. It ties up courts and gets nowhere. It doesn't free people. It goes around in circles, and there's 25 to 50,000 people on this continent that are so-called experts at it, and we do not have a solution that has protected anybody. Right? The truth is simple. It protects people too when they use it correctly. All right? Decisions get made and determinations get made by Original Nations people repeatedly, but they stand their ground, and there's nothing this system can do to deny it.
Yeah.
Because we stand in that truth and we defend it. And we hold them accountable by telling them that everything they do will be used against them. There's evidence in these genocide proceedings, which will happen because we're only going forward. We're not taking backward steps.
Yeah.
So we have to go outside of this continent and talk to the rest of the world's freedom movements in order to get this energy behind this solution that will save and help mankind. And that's globally. Everywhere on earth seeks to benefit from this direction, from this accountability. So if we have to go to the rest of the world first to make this energy relevant enough to defeat the prejudice of the Australian nationalists, then we will. But it has to be done. You know, I'm not here to argue anymore. And, you know, this is 10 years of my life, and there's 10 years more before my son has to take it on himself. And like I told you, he's not going to because it'll be done.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful world that we're all trying to create, that's for sure, mate. And every day I keep meeting another new person that's, you know, on the right path and pushing this forward. We are at an hour and 22. I don't know if people are, you know, I can see we've got quite a few viewers across multiple platforms here. So if anybody's got any questions they'd like to throw in, now's the opportunity. I think we might definitely have to continue this conversation at a later date in some capacity. You know, maybe we'll be a little bit more prepared to sort of present something that's, you know, a little bit more chronological. You know, makes a little bit more streamlined sense for some people. Again, you know, leave some comments even if you're watching this afterwards, and you know you want to understand these things, you know, because it's the pathway, the searching for the knowledge, I think, is a really important thing, you know. And it was something I didn't like to hear a lot as a young fella, because I just want to know now, just tell me, you know. But yeah, you've got to take those steps. You know, there's certain things you've got to understand before you can understand the next bit. You know, it's slow, it sucks, it's painful, but it is what it is. You know, we got somebody saying, "Hey, brother," here. Is this someone you know?
Who we got there? Donovan. Yeah, Donovan. He's a good fella. He's been doing some good videos lately, just sharing my content and breaking it down. I met him in Canberra the second time. He was real helpful and supportive of everyone in the camp there. So,
awesome.
Yeah,
Might have to.
I'll be happy to have a secondary yarn another time, mate. It'd be good, actually. And you get a chance to talk to your support and formulate some questions for me that are relevant. like I said earlier, I'm not going to debate about things that aren't like backed up by anything substantial, like the pygmy
Yeah.
yarn and the Egyptians being here first and all this stuff. You know, I know a lot about the history of this continent, and I know a lot about the different types of people that have been and visited this continent over time. But there is direct evidence across the board here that suggests that that the same people, the original people that are still here with their connection today, their DNA bloodline connections today, are the same people that have been here for over 100,000 years. Like there's evidence of that would go that far back and further.
Yeah.
You know, the stories that go a lot further, but there's anthropological evidence.
Yeah,
that would
I've
support
heard a lot
that.
of the similar sorts of things, and I'm hearing more and more as the days go on. But some of these stories are not for me to tell, that's for sure. And in the right setting, the right people, you come across the right stories, and you can start hearing things. But you've got to have the ears to hear and the eyes to see before that sort of comes to pass, in my experience.
And the heart to
But
expand. We've got to be ready to
yeah,
expand on what we know and what we can achieve together. And as long as we're honest, I don't see how we can go wrong.
yeah,
As long as we're not holding back or trying to pretend.
yeah. Too often we've been taught to say things to please people, and it creates a real conflict of the mind. And I think particularly when you look around in the world today, there's so much insanity. Like, people are just like blatantly saying some of the most ridiculous, nonsensical garbage I've ever heard. It's just getting even more and more ridiculous. It's like, do you people even hear yourselves? It doesn't even begin to make sense. I could cite many examples, but it's like kind of not what we're here to do today. But you got to wonder is, these little programs that have been dropped in people's heads all these years, I believe that's the cause of this insanity. They've been given so much conflicting and contradictory information that it's sending people nuts.
And then little driplets of truth in amongst it to keep them like feeling like they're onto something, and just looping in the same narratives and agendas. Like, it's red pill, blue pill, and I tell people all the time, don't take pills, mate. But pills are manufactured. Who's making these pills, these red and blue? Who's making your pills for you? Because they're both being hand fed to you.
Yeah.
Like, step aside and start using your discernment and look at how the world works, what rights are of different ways how the world works, and you'll figure out very quickly how they're doing this and what they're coming for, and what their plan is, and how we have the biggest trump card of all that can save humanity, and it's because the longest ongoing crime affects more nations than the rest of them combined in a world of international diplomacy. So we have the biggest body of nations on earth, currently the foundation of the world's biggest crime, and we can change everything by holding them accountable for it. And they're all guilty. The Vanguards, the Black Rocks, the Crown, the Vatican, they're all guilty of their complicity in this crime. They all owe reparations. Every cent that was ever come off this land has been a crime. Every single bit of iron ore, gold, sapphire, diamond, every bit of sand, it's been a crime to remove it off this land and profit from it over these seas. So all these corporations that have been complicit in that owe big time. So they're not going to have anything left to fight us with. That's the whole point. And the law can be held to its fundamental integrity by the people, by demanding it. That's our role and responsibility, especially as men. The men out there that stand up and lead this, let the women chill and be at peace a little bit, instead of letting the women take the lead roles all over the place. Let them be women, and we can take care of some of this. We've got to be strong and proud of our masculinity and not fall to the agendas of the alphabet crew.
That's it. I think it's one of the big sabotages right now, is to try and, destroy the standard image of a man, to stop that sort of thing happening and take away all our normal roles and reverse everything and turn it all upside down and leave everybody lost and confused.
Exactly, brother. Exactly. And women, they're just reshaping women to try and become men. Like, What are you doing? What are you doing? How do we respect one another when they're doing this to us?
Yeah.
it makes it impossible. We need to be more respectful of who we genuinely are. Support that in ourselves and each other, and that's how we'll have better relationships and we'll work better, and we'll find these solutions together.
Exactly.
We can't pretend. We're always pretending to be something we're not. We've got to stop doing that.
Definitely, mate. Well, it's been good. We haven't got any questions popping in, so I think we might wrap it up there, mate. Thank you very much for coming on. It's been awesome. Again, for anybody who wants to know more, we've got landmarshal.org, landlawmarshal.org. Sorry, I'll learn to read one day. It's never been my strong point.
That's all good. That's all good. Landlawmarshal.org. Yep, that's where there's plenty to learn on the website, and honestly, any support that comes in is greatly appreciated, and just trying to get that petition out into the global freedom community is really important, because the more numbers that we have, that I can speak with more authority at the system based on the will of those people, saying that we support this and we demand this integrity in the law, then that's the energy, I believe, that can get it done. That's the one thing we haven't tried, is to tell the full truth. We've tried everything else 100 times, but it's time to tell the full truth, and make that a reality. So I really appreciate you having me on the show, Batty. It's been a good yarn, bro, and I appreciate all you're doing for the continent and helping people come to these, confronting realities and get ready for freedom, because freedom isn't free, but it's bloody simple once you confront the truth. I'll tell you right now.
I wholeheartedly agree, mate. And again, extend the thanks for your amazing work. We're all, like I've been saying quite a lot lately, we're all like sort of pieces of the puzzle, Well, I'm not sure what this big puzzle looks like yet, but I'm pretty sure that big word freedom stamped on it in some capacity. So yeah, we'll definitely get together again, man. It's been awesome meeting you like this, because this is, for those who didn't realise, this is the first time we've actually met. We've had a quick yarn on the phone here and there to organise this day, and it's pretty interesting to meet someone for the first time in broad view of the public and everybody sitting back and watching it. It's an interesting concept. It's still a bit strange to me, but I'm getting used to it. And here's to many more new people to meet along the way. I will remind people that we have started up the Patreon, where we're going to have lots of full interviews and uncensored material and whatnot. Not that we censor anything, but pieces won't be cut out to try and cram it into a small time frame. For people who really want to know the full story, you're going to have to get the Patreon to hopefully help me pay some bills. Obviously, all our links and bits and pieces to various different social medias are here in the old link tree, which is also in the description. And if you've got a story to share, or you want to, meet up like Dylan and I just have here for a bit of a yarn about something, because something that the rest of the world needs to know, then you drop me a line and we will get in touch with you and organise something. Until then, stay free, people. Thank you very much for coming on, Dylan. It's been awesome, mate.
My treat. I really appreciate it, buddy. Have a good night, mate. Thanks, everybody.
You too.
Be safe. Cheers.